All right, on behalf of the GNAR initiative, welcome to the fourth of 5 sessions of our amenity migration series named Boomtown, Amenity Migration in the Rural West and the Rise of the Zoomtown. My name is Jake Palin with USU Extension, and we want to welcome you. This is really exciting. We have a great lineup today to have to start and continue what we are considering a tough conversation, and we appreciate you being part of having those conversations with us. So a little bit about us. The GNAR initiative is a project of Utah State University Extension's Institute of Outdoor Recreation and Tourism. And really the GNAR initiative is meant to be a hub. It's a hub for researchers, practitioners, community members to work on and grapple with and understand the challenges in gateway communities. So it's important to remember that the GNAR initiative is for you, but it also needs you. So a couple of things, a couple of ways you can get involved with our community. You're welcome and invited to join our email list to keep up to date on information about webinars, resources, news releases, and to keep informed about what the GNAR initiative is up to. That link to join our email list is going to be put up in the chat. You're also welcome and invited to join the GNAR network, which is a specialized group. It's a place for GNAR communities to connect. So this website that's being pasted into the chat will help you connect and join that network as well. We're always looking for ways to build our efforts. So if you have any other ideas, please reach out to us at the GNAR initiative if you're interested in supporting our work. So speaking of supporting our work, this work is sponsored and supported through the generous efforts of these organizations here on this screen, and we really appreciate all their help to make this a possibility. Also, just recently, I want to let you know that we are a group of people that are really passionate about what we do, but we do it because we're passionate about it. So if you are interested or you have the ability to support our work, we do have a Donate Now button on our website. If this is something that's beneficial to you, we invite you to help support our work. Also, with that support, we've been generously supported by Frontier Forward, who has sponsored AICP continuing education credits for this session. So if you are interested or that applies to you as a planner, those credits are available using the link that's being posted in the chat as well. So this is, again, our Boomtown Amenity Migration series. And just to give you sort of a back history, we've talked in session 1 about how this phenomenon of gateway, or how this phenomenon of amenity migration has been evolving over time. In our second session, we talked about what kind of trends are happening. In our last session, we had some great community perspectives from leaders about how it's affecting their individual communities. And in this session, we're going to have a conversation about some tools and resources and ways communities have been affected through the work of one of our partner organizations or friends of ours in Montana in Future West. And then looking forward in December, on December 3rd, we're going to take a break from the formalities of these webinar hosted sessions, and we're going to invite you as community members to have a conversation and build consensus and understanding about what we've been really talking about over the last couple months and how it affects you and how you might be able to help other communities in the GNAR initiative grapple with these real big challenges. So a couple of things, some Zoom etiquette. First thing I want you to do is I want you to open up your chat and make sure that it is set to go to all attendees and all panelists. That's one of the options. And we want to know who you are. We want to know who the audience is today. So please open up your chat. I'll quickly show you how that's done. Put your name and an organization or community that you're representing. So please feel free to put your name and your community in the chat and share it with everybody. We want to know who's out there. So it looks like we have quite a few people coming in from the West, people from California, Utah, clear into the Bay Area, Tahoe. It's good to see representation from across the West. This is great. Really, the intention of the NAR initiative is to bring us all together to have these kind of conversations. So thank you for those of you. Please keep putting your names, organizations, and or communities you represent. We appreciate that. So just a couple things to note. The chat will be recorded, and it is something that's shared across all of our presenters and our audience. So please, we encourage you to use the chat as a way to converse with other communities. Please feel free to share links, resources, ideas, insights, but please be sure that to note that this is being shared with everybody and being recorded. So please don't share anything you wouldn't want to be recorded and published and shared later. So we do use these webinars as a way for us in the Academy to record and understand the dynamics of what's happening as data. So your participation in this webinar and your use of the chat feature is considered informed consent. So if you have any questions, feel free to let us know offline. So just to let you know about the rest of the event, we're going to have about 40 minutes of interactive presentations. That's going to include a video, which we've tried multiple times, but you guys all know if you've done this, as soon as you put your best intentions with technology, sometimes those things don't always work. So we hope that all goes well. And then we'll have a Q&A session at the end. And in order to make that Q&A session powerful, we hope that you'll invest some time and energy putting questions, things that you're worrying about that are applicable to what Randy and Dennis talk about today, in the Q&A section of the Zoom feature. So that can be opened up in the bottom of your Zoom window, and make sure that you're using the Q&A. Now, we will use Q&A as a way to ask questions, and I'll be curating those at the end of the presentation. But throughout this, we will be using the chat feature. We'll be asking for you to share your ideas and insights through the chat feature. So again, just make sure you're using the chat for posting and responding to prompts given by our presenters or myself, and you're using the Q&A throughout the session to pose questions to our presenters. So with that, I want to welcome Randy and Dennis and to introduce themselves and give us a little bit of insight into their work at Future West. Randy, you're still on mute. I think that's the most common phrase of 2020. So welcome, Randy and Dennis, to the webinar, unmuted and everything.
Yeah, we're muted by the host. Yes. Okay, we're good now.
Okay. Yeah, as I like to say, technology is like horses. They know when you fear it. In any case, good to see everybody. And I recognize a number of names that popped up. And first, I want to thank Liz and Jake for this opportunity to present our work at Future West. And also thank you guys for hosting these webinars. We found them really useful and really appreciate your efforts. And also thank you all that are joining us today. I know that you're very busy people and you've taken time out of your schedules to be with us, and we really appreciate it. I think we appreciate even more all the work that you're doing to ensure the well-being of your communities and adjacent parks and wildlands. So know that that's deeply appreciated. A little bit about myself. I guess I've never introduced myself. I am the director of Future West. We've been in existence for a decade. I'll talk a little bit more about the organization in a sec. Previous to that, I was the director of the Bozeman office of the Sonoran Institute, which some of you may be familiar with, you folks in the Southwest especially. And before that, I worked for the Greater Yellowstone Coalition as the Private Land Stewardship Program Director. So I've been privileged and honored to be working in the Northern Rockies region now for about 3 decades. And have had the opportunity to see a lot of country and a lot of communities. And people often ask me, you know, what's your favorite places? And I like to say, well, there's 2. One is the middle of the Washakie Wilderness on the eastern boundary of Yellowstone. And the other is Main Street in Livingston, Montana on July 2nd for the rodeo parade. We're just so lucky to live in a place that has both these fantastic, iconic communities juxtaposed with some of the wildest landscapes in the lower 48. And my partner, Randy.
Yeah, so I'm Randy Carpenter. I also work with Future West. I head up our Successful Communities program, which we'll be talking more about today. My background is a land use planner. I was a community planner in a number of cities back in my home state of Iowa before moving out to the West about 20 years ago to work with the Sonoran Institute with Dennis at the time, and then moved to Future West, I think about 5 years ago. And working with a range of communities in the West on a host of issues, community development and planning issues. And as I said, we'll be talking more about the Successful Community program that I spend most of my time on.
Well, just a little bit about Future West. This year we celebrated our 10th anniversary. We're a nonprofit based in Bozeman. Our mission is to help communities identify and create the future that they want. Pretty tall order, but we try to do that by providing people and oftentimes key decision makers like city and county officials, other NGOs, rural landowners with information, training, technical assistance, and facilitation services that they need to make wise decisions on a wide array of conservation and development issues. Now, today, we'd like to focus on our Successful Communities program and specifically talk about our work in a couple of towns. One is the booming town of the gateway to Yellowstone, first gateway to Yellowstone Park, Gardiner, Montana. The other is Deer Lodge, Montana, which is kind of going in the opposite direction and losing population. Just briefly, our presentation will cover the following three topics. A bit about the Successful Communities program. We'll talk about why its history and why we decided to resurrect the program in the year 2020, and then how we're applying this in a couple of places. Introduce this topic, we wanted to share a video that's just, I don't know, it's not hot off the press, it's hot off of the editing room floor. It's a video about an area called the High Divide, which is the chain of counties that link the greater Yellowstone area with the wildlands of central Idaho. And as you'll hear in the video, a lot of conservation work is going on in this region. Most of it focused on public lands and also trying to conserve and sustain the working landscapes that connect those public lands. Future West takes a little different approach. We're looking at the communities in this region, and earlier this year, we did a socioeconomic demographic profile of the towns that dot this landscape and produced a little report, and it was interesting, but it wasn't that exciting to read. And we thought, let's put this report in an audio-visual format, and that's exactly what we've done. And we thought that would be a good introduction to our session today. So if you could bear with us and watch this for a few minutes. Can you start the video?
Hey there, my name is Cameron Ellis, and I'd like to talk to you for a few minutes about a place called the High Divide. The High Divide is the Montana-Idaho border between Yellowstone and Glacier National Parks. This place is my home, and along with my friends at Future West, we spend a lot of time thinking about how it's changing and what our future looks like. And I'm a maps and data person, so we're going to look at a bunch of maps and charts and graphs, economic and demographic trends. But quickly, before I jump in, I'd like to mention two things. The first is that Future West is a Montana-based community development organization that has been working in the High Divide for over a decade. They hunt, fish, ride bikes, raise families, and spend a lot of time with the people and local leaders of the region. So while we might look at a lot of numbers over the next 10 minutes, this is grounded in the real questions and concerns that folks have out here. People out here know that our communities and our environment are intimately linked, so taking charge of change and growth is critical to owning our future and keeping our quality of life. Number 2, coronavirus is reshaping the globe, and that includes the High Divide. It's really hard to tell what things will look like on the flip side of this pandemic, but our guess is that many of the trends that we've seen over the past 20 years will only accelerate as people look to places like Montana and Idaho to work and raise families. All right, that said, let's get into it. The High Divide is about 21,000 square miles of rugged mountains and sweeping valleys that connect the greater Yellowstone area with the wildlands of central Idaho and the crown of the continent area around Glacier National Park. It's a crucial ecological link between those areas, and it's been the focus of a ton of conservation efforts over the years. We have millions of acres of public lands and farms and ranches. This is habitat for species that just don't exist anywhere else in the country. Get off the beaten track a bit, and this is the West that Lewis and Clark saw 200 years ago. But the High Divide is home for more than just wildlife. We've got dozens of small cities and towns that are home to tough, adventuresome people who raise families and live lives that you just can't find anywhere else. Depending on where exactly you draw the line, the High Divide is made up of about 15 counties containing about 120 cities and towns. That's 135 local governments, and as of 2019, it's home to about 233,000 people. The region has grown slowly over the past century, and in recent years, population growth in the High Divide has been pretty uneven. Some counties have grown quickly in the past 18 years, and 4 have actually lost population. Madison County, Idaho grew by nearly 12,000 people between 2000 and 2018, while Butte County, Idaho lost almost 300 people in that same time span. Overall, the region added 27,000 new homes since the year 2000, which brings us to a total of about 112,000 homes. That's about 5 homes per square mile. Interestingly, new homes have been growing much faster than population. From 2000 to 2018, the number of houses increased almost 30% faster than the population. 2/3 of High Divide counties actually added more homes than people between 2000 and 2010, and that's almost entirely due to second home construction. If the region continues to grow at the same annual rate, there will be about 100,000 more people in the High Divide in 20 years and 56,000 new homes. So where are those people and houses going to go? For the past 20 years, almost 2/3 of the homes built in the High Divide have been built outside towns. In more than half of the counties, the percentage of homes built in rural areas is over 70%. Is that a problem? Well, it depends on how you look at it. Personally, I like my open space. I like fish in the creek and nothing but pronghorn between me and the mountains. At the same time, I like my towns to be towns. Kids in the street, people in the stores, and football in the park. And out-of-town home development just takes up so much more land. And if 70% of all these new homes over the next 20 years are built out there, that's a lot of land that's being taken up. The average rural lot is between 2 and 20 acres, while the average town lot is around 1/4 of an acre. Multiply that by thousands of homes over the coming years, and it makes a huge difference. If the split was just 50-50 instead of 70-30, we would have an extra 20,000 acres of wide open country. But it's more than just land. All that rural development comes with a big price tag for taxpayers. Just the infrastructure to support rural housing costs 138% more to build and 110% more to service. Meanwhile, it only produces 10% of the tax revenue. It's not much of a bargain. And prioritizing in-town growth isn't just better for taxpayers and community and open space, it's also better for wildlife. Many of those new homes are being built in riparian areas, which are some of the best habitat we've got out there. And another thing, despite building lots of new homes, Housing in many high divide communities is a challenge. Home prices continue to increase while incomes stay the same. Take a look. That ratio has gotten worse for almost every county in the high divide from just 2009 to 2017. The result? More than half of the households in the high divide are what's called cost burdened. That's money they can't spend at a business or a cafe on Main Street. Let's take a closer look at demographics and economics. The region is getting older. Average ages in the high divide are older than the Montana and Idaho averages. There's nothing wrong with that in principle, but it means that school enrollments will drop and our kids are moving away and not coming back. And the businesses that need working age folks will have to look elsewhere to set up shop. All right, and speaking of business, earnings per job in the high divide have been very stagnant over time. Meanwhile, overall incomes are growing. This is from what's called non-wage income, which is mostly money generated from stock portfolios and government income like Social Security, not local jobs supporting local families, which are steadily falling behind the cost of living out here. So, aside from investment portfolios, how are people making money around here? A lot of folks see this landscape and think mining or farming or government jobs, and there's plenty of that to be sure. But the reality is that most of the money made in the high divide comes from the service industry, which is the only economy out here that's really been growing over the past 20 years. That's not to say that there aren't opportunities in the region for higher wage jobs. Sectors like high tech and healthcare are creating new jobs and diversifying some of the economies. Entrepreneurs and talented workers are choosing to work where they can enjoy outdoor recreation and natural landscapes. For communities that want to see growth and economic diversity, the mountains and rivers of the high divide can be a huge competitive advantage. But attracting growth or just managing change comes with some big questions. What do we want to look like? How do we get there? How do we attract the type of growth that we want? Where should all those new houses go, and what people will be able to afford them? How can we grow in a way that makes good use of our open spaces and our tax dollars? How can we grow in a way that improves our economy? Future West is confident that we, as the residents of the high divide that know our land and culture best, have the answers to these questions. But there are a few keys or hallmarks of the communities that successfully thread that careful balance of conserving what we love most about our lands and communities, while also improving our economies and opportunities going forward. Successful communities develop an inclusive and broadly shared vision of the future based on an accurate understanding of their local economy and their local assets. Successful communities understand their own economy and demographics within the context of the regional, national, and global economies. Successful communities understand how local natural and cultural assets influence and are affected by population growth and development. Successful communities effectively manage growth, change, and the built environment with both regulatory and non-regulatory strategies. Finally, and perhaps most importantly, successful communities value leadership and cultivate local leaders who reflect local culture and vision. If any of these qualities sound like things that you or your community would like to work on, and I happen to think that there's probably never been a better time to do that, just drop Future West a line at info@futurewest.org.
Dennis, thanks for sharing that video. I wanted to reach out before we got into inviting Randy and Dennis to share some more. I want to ask you a question, those of you in the audience. I'm in the chat here, but I want to know, what are 3 things for you, use the chat, that resonated for you in your community from this video? So take a minute to think about that and then post in the chat the 3 things that resonated for you or the community you represent that came from that video. We'll give you a few minutes to post those. Feel free to post them in real time as you get them thought up. So a couple questions. Can we get a link to the video to share it with others? Randy and Dennis, we'll have you cover that after this question, if they can have access to that video or where they might find it. But it looks like people are experiencing similar issues across the West, looking for your local assets, the desires for outdoor recreation, people looking for vision, the fact that second homes aren't bringing money into the region, that those homes are growing outside of town, housing prices, second homes, keeping towns and rural. These are all issues that look like, and again, we have an audience from across the Intermountain West and sometimes even beyond that. And it sounds like, Randy and Dennis, these aren't high divide issues alone. These are issues that are spanning a large geography of other places that have these natural amenities, these quintessential Western towns as part of them. So it sounds like we're seeing a lot of this across our region. So on that note, we wanted to take a quick poll about sort of the status of your communities. So the questions that we want to ask are a little bit about how you feel like you know, and how informed and accurate you feel like your understanding is about the challenges in your community, and then second, about your understanding. So if you could take a second and just share with us your thoughts on how you feel like your community is doing on these. Great, we have lots of feedback coming in. I want to give you about 15 more seconds to share your opinions with us. So it sounds like there's some interesting feedback from our communities, Randy and Dennis. I want to give you some time to maybe talk through what you see in our poll, as well as talk about some of the work you and Future West are doing in the Great Divide, or in the High Divide, and the work that you see as important in these communities.
Great. Can you hear me? Okay. Well, really interesting to see that feedback. And a couple of years ago, when we decided to resurrect the Successful Communities program, we did a little questioning similar to those questions, and with very similar results. And that really solidified our belief that the timing was right for a Successful Communities like program. Oh, excuse me. Yeah. I did. Yeah.
Do you want us to go back to our presentation now?
Yes.
Yep, now's the time.
So, full disclosure, Successful Communities was not our original idea. There was a guy named Luther Probst that some of you may be familiar with. He was the founder and director of the Sonoran Institute out of Tucson. And he, about 25, 30 years ago, he initiated the first incarnation of Successful Communities. In fact, this is a flyer from a Successful Communities process in Gardiner, Montana from, I don't know, 1992, something like that. Those were tumultuous times in the greater Yellowstone area. I know I was in the heart of a lot of these controversies surrounding primarily resource extraction. And there were pitched battles over logging and oil and gas development, public land grazing. They were very contentious times. It was also becoming apparent that there was a new emerging economy, something that was quite different from resource extraction. In fact, it was an economy that could be harmed by resource extraction. And we talked about it in the video, the service economy, tourism, recreation, people moving to the region for the natural amenities. And some of us that were tracking these economic changes, were applauding them and thinking that, oh my gosh, this is going to be the solution to all of our environmental problems. Of course, little did we know what was coming. And also within the communities, they were really tough times. I lived in Livingston then, and I still do now. And our railroad was shutting down. Our timber mill was threatened. Agricultural operations were being reduced. Public land grazing prohibited. And people were really distraught. We did not have a plan B, that is a plan for how we were going to transition to this new economy. We had no vision for really what we wanted to become. And virtually none of us had thought about how we were going to manage the challenges of what we call the New West. So enter this guy, Luther Probst, and he brought communities together to help them develop a shared understanding of their challenges as well as their opportunities. And if they didn't have one already, he walked them through the process of crafting a vision for the future and a doable action plan for achieving that vision. A few of us that were working on conservation issues at the time in Greater Yellowstone thought that several communities might benefit from going through such a process. And to make a long story short, Luther ended up facilitating 8 successful community processes in the early 90s in 8 different communities. Now, the long-term impacts of these successful community events varied from town to town. In some places, they spurred land use planning, redoing master plans, creating land trusts. In other places, they were more of a catalyst for civil dialogue on a variety of issues and helping people to understand that they really did share many values. One community in particular that maybe was sort of the shining star of these 8 different communities was Red Lodge, Montana. And at the end of their successful communities workshop, they created a non-governmental entity called the Beartooth Front Community Forum, which is still in existence today. And it sort of watchdogs the community's progress in achieving that vision and updating it. And it's really been a really important player in the development of that town. So fast forward a quarter of a century, not only did these communities not dry up and blow away, several of them are now struggling with an array of growth issues, and you know what they are: affordable housing, sprawl, loss of community character, the multiple impacts of tourism. And so we really felt like the time was right to resurrect an all new, all improved, successful communities process. And that's exactly what we're doing.
Thanks, Dennis. So, you know, as Dennis is saying, the communities here grappling with a whole host of issues, dealing with growth or sometimes, the lack of growth. So there's land trusts, watershed councils, conservation groups, private land stewards working to conserve a mosaic of public and private lands that support rural livelihoods and wildlife, ecosystem services, outdoor recreation. But few of these efforts really focus on engaging local communities on issues related to the community well-being, economic development and growth, the cities and towns of the region. And Future West, we want to change that because we don't think growth should be a roll of the dice. Of course, all communities are unique, but as you saw in the video, there are some hallmarks of successful communities in our mind. One is a complete understanding of community challenges and opportunities, meaningful engagement by more residents, widely shared vision for the future, and a realistic practical action plan that has buy-in. And we'll talk about the application of those hallmarks in just a bit. There's also other issues like declining wages for many, and coupled with increased housing costs is due to rising demand and the nature of that demand as well. as many of you know, in your communities, you have people sometimes moving in. We do here in Bozeman, especially in this era of COVID, they're moving in with equity. And they come in with a lot of money, and they're able to outcompete existing residents for housing. There's also inadequate housing production, has a variety of sources. Some of it is due to NIMBYism. And then the rise of second homes and, you know, short-term rentals or Airbnbs, which is another feature of the New West economy, has really created a housing crisis in basically every community in which we work. There's also infrastructure maintenance following behind because growth isn't paying its own way, sprawl degrading the rural landscape, strip development that hollows out historic downtowns, challenges related to the service economy that too often doesn't provide high paying jobs, especially true in declining communities. And to be clear, when we talk about declining communities, we mean those places that are losing population in jobs, substandard housing that barely meets basic needs, a loss of community character from franchise development that offers cheap goods, but results in a loss of local businesses. So the first community to respond to the unveiling of this new initiative, this new Successful Communities Initiative, was the town of Gardiner, Montana, mentioned gateway to Yellowstone Park. And it was also one of the first communities to participate in the Successful Community Program of 25 years ago. Gardiner's not only on the doorstep of Yellowstone Park, it's also in that growing region of Montana. Basically, the eastern 2/3 of Montana are moving into the western third of Montana. As you can see on this map, the darker blue colors are where there's more population growth. It's a pretty unique community, though, that it's kind of a pretty compact, fairly dense urban community, really probably denser than any, you know, small town in Montana, but it's not incorporated. That is, it doesn't have a local government and absolutely no land use regulations, meaning that anybody can do anything they want, which is good, but they can also build anything they want. And right now, in a lot of places, they're creating a housing crisis while profiting from it. So the most salient Gardiner issues really are a growth in tourism. Yellowstone National Park grew, visitation grew 23% from 2013 to 2018. Mentioned the short-term rentals, second homes. Gardiner community, about 850. Last time I looked, has over 120 Airbnbs. What that means, those used to be long-term rentals, teachers, et cetera, living in them. And well, now they can't live in them now, and now they're rented out to visitors. And that creates a lack of housing. Demand stays the same, but the supply has actually dropped instead of increasing like it really should have. Drop in school enrollment. Gardiner schools has lost about 1/3 of their enrollment in the last 10 years. That's primarily due to a lack of housing. Families that would bring new students in, young students in to start in first grade and kindergarten are not moving there because there's not housing. So when that 12th grade cohort moves out, you know, that might be 25 students, but the kindergarten class is only like 5 students. So real concern for the future of the school district. And then, as I mentioned, no local government, or what we call the operating system of Gardiner. How do things get done? Right now, the way things get done is through it's very decentralized, host of special districts, and the county provides law enforcement and road maintenance, for instance. So very decentralized. There's not one entity that can bring community together to, you know, define a vision for the future. So I'm just going to quickly go through the phases of our Successful Communities program as applied in Gardiner. First, we organize a steering committee of local folks to develop a project plan and a public community engagement plan, and to help with community engagement. So as steering committee, the idea, they would go out and talk to their neighbors and friends and help them get involved in the process. There's a variety of folks from the Old West, ranchers to the New West folks to the public agency folks. Then we created a community profile to help the community understand where it is, the understanding of the existing economic, socioeconomic situation and trends in the community. We use we put together a bunch of objective community data. But we also, part of the community profile was to interview and survey community stakeholders on their attitudes about the community. And then we made that profile widely accessible, using our communications infrastructure for the project. Of course, there's a website and social media, but we also distributed a lot of print documents of that community profile, which again included government, federal data, state data. We use GIS mapping, and down there in the lower right-hand corner, you see a word cloud that is like a result of the surveys that we did. And then near the end of the project, we did a successful communities workshop, bringing people together to go over that community profile. Let's all get on the same page of where we're going. In Gardiner, we thought that went really well. In fact, we had over 100 people the first night, and I think 85 the second night, in a community of, again, 850 people. For Bozeman, that would be, something like 7,000 people, and we cannot get 7,000 people at a workshop in Bozeman, for sure. The workshop was started with a presentation of the community profiles I mentioned, the crafting of a community vision, what do we want to be in the future, and then action planning, who's going to do what and when, concrete action plan, and then transition to action, assignment of key tasks to actors, who's going to do what again, identification of catalyst projects, what are those low-hanging fruits that can move on to bigger and better things, an entity to watchdog implementation, a structure for communication to sustain momentum. Here's the Gardiner steering committee here, and there's a copy cover of the community profile. And then, we moved into the workshops, again, really well attended. We were very pleased with that. And this here is a result of the questions that we posed near the end, really that defining question, which of those three operating systems do they want to move forward with? Again, they're the status quo, keep doing what they're doing, do this county planning and zoning, sort of a quasi local government, actually, and then actual self-governance via incorporation. As you can see, only a fraction of people wanted to stay with the status quo. For a lot of people, maybe incorporation was a bridge too far. I think the middle ground, planning and zoning district, for many was a good compromise. Maybe the idea that they'd have to pay a town property tax swayed people, even though our analysis in the community profile showed it'd be fairly modest, but that might have been part of it. So after the workshops, we prepared parts. There was a chronicle of that process and a guide to future action. And based on what we heard from the community in the workshops, a core group of the steering committee opted to pursue a community plan and zoning district, that sort of quasi local government option. And it might sound kind of wonky, but I think that would be huge watershed for Gardiner. For 140 years, it really had no plans for its future and no land use regulations at all to achieve that future. And I think the large majority of Gardiner citizens realize that's just not sustainable. Not if they want to protect their community character, and not if they want to prevent really a dissension into being just a tourist town with some workers. Well, then sort of the perfect storm hit after all of that. COVID understandably slowed the process significantly, and then Gardiner went into what they call a full battle mode of the onslaught of visitors to Yellowstone Park later in the spring, and then really unfortunately a fire wiped out a significant chunk of Gardiner's historic downtown. But now as the tourism season winds down, which is happening later and later every year, the team is prepared to get back at it and push to completion. I hope something that very rarely happens in Montana, residents overcoming an entrenched inertia to move from a total laissez-faire attitude about the future to actually shaping the future of their community. But our presentation is a tale of two cities, not a tale of growing cities. And as we said, not all communities are dealing with the challenges from growth. They stem from a loss of growth, from a declining economic base. And one of those communities is the town of Deer Lodge in Montana. Deer Lodge has lost 40% of its population since 1960. It peaked at almost 5,000 people back then, and now it's down to under 3,000 people. The thing that's unique about Deer Lodge is it's only one of three communities in that fast-growing western region of Montana to actually be losing population. The folks in Deer Lodge would like to change that. They'd like to see more jobs. They'd like to see a stronger economy. They'd like to see a growing population. So last year, the city of Deer Lodge approached us about working there. We're now just in the fact-finding and initial project organizing and public outreach phase. But what I can tell you is that Deer Lodge has so many of those characteristics of growing Western communities. It's surrounded by public lands and mountains and rivers. It's got a pretty cool downtown with some awesome old buildings, an excellent fishery. The Clark Fork runs right through it. It's even got a national park unit, the Grant Coors Ranch. So you'd think it'd be dealing with too much growth, really. So why is Deer Lodge going against the regional trends? We're not sure yet, but we'll start our interview and survey efforts in a few weeks. It could be its long legacy as a prison town. The original prison shown in the upper left was established actually 18 years before Montana even became a state. And when it closed down, a new prison just outside of town took its place. So, in Montana, you'll hear people say, dude keeps this up, he's going to end up in Deer Lodge. And so, that's probably not good for the community's image to the outside world, the people who are thinking about moving in to invest in the community. There's also the proximity to other declining towns in the region. So Butte and Anaconda are just right up the road. They're sort of, it's sort of like they're the Montana's Rust Belt or Rust Corridor, you might say. I think it's going to be, important that we understand as a community in Deer Lodge, just where we are and how we got there, but it's really going to be mainly future focused. So as far as I can see, hope for a successful Deer Lodge can be found in the story of the historic Rialto Theater, which burned nearly to the ground in 2006. The community came together under the energetic leadership of a core group and raised $3.5 million. And from the ashes, rebuilt the theater almost to spec from the blueprints of the original structure. About a month ago, I visited the inside of the theater, and as one who appreciates historic architecture, I was just blown away. I was just astounded that something like that could be completed anywhere, let alone Deer Lodge. So there's no doubt that the community has that pride and that sense of place, that leadership to make it successful. Well, this project, Successful Deer Lodge, we'll use basically the same process that we use in Gardiner in an effort to help the community to do just that. We've created a website, we're working on a video and community profile. I'll start interviewing people after Thanksgiving. We're also scheduling a Zoom-based speaker series on those most salient issues, big community issues, which include, unsurprisingly, economic development and housing. The idea was that next spring we'd hold community workshops. We're starting to realize this is unlikely to happen, not in-person workshops. At any rate, Montana's got one of the highest rates of COVID cases in the county now. And we're assuming that winter is just going to make it worse. So we may have to do Zoom workshops. I'm not sure how that's going to work. That will be new to us. So we've got some learning to do there. Maybe we'll hold a series of smaller socially based workshops in large venues, or wait till summer when we can do them outside. I'm sure there's a lot of discussions just like this going on in communities around the country.
Thank you, Randy. And again, thank you all for joining us. Just, a quick summary. In the conservation community, which I have been a part of for too long, maybe, are thinking about how to conserve parks and protected wildlands. It's a work in progress. It continues to evolve. And, at one time we were just concerned about the health of park resources within park boundaries. And then about 30 years ago, we started to realize that these units are embedded in much larger ecosystems. And guess what? We discovered there are communities that are embedded in these landscapes, and how these towns grow and develop can have positive or negative impacts on both the quality of life of their human residents, as well as the environmental quality of adjacent parks, protected areas. Unfortunately, many of these towns are struggling with an array of issues that you all know well. And in many cases, they do not have a clear vision of the future or a shared understanding of their challenges, nor especially a homegrown action plan for addressing these needs. And we'd like to think that our Successful Communities program, and we know there are several other similar programs out there, but we'd like to think that they can help foster this understanding of shared values and priority problems and promising opportunities. And we believe that with this foundation, they can move more effectively into preparing for and engaging in, as we all know too well, an ever-changing world, but move into that world in a manner that really benefits people, gateway towns, and their adjacent parks and protected areas. So thank you again for joining us. And I think we'll hand it over to Jake for some Q&A. Look forward to hearing what you have to say.
Yeah, Randy, Dennis, thank you so much for sharing some insights with us. We do have a couple of questions that have come in from the audience. Again, if you have questions for Randy and Dennis, please use the Q&A feature to help me keep track of all these questions in a single place. So yeah, thank you again for that. And I'm going to use that phrase with my kids. If they start to act up, I'm going to tell them that if they keep that up, they're going to end up in Deer Lodge to maybe change their behavior. So before I open up the Q&A, I did want to ask some of our community members or audience members that are representing this bigger group across the Intermountain West, if they'd be willing to share through a poll. You've given these Tale of Two Towns, and Randy, I think if you can close or stop sharing your screen, that would help us. But I'm curious if your community identifies more with a Gardiner type situation or a Deer Lodge, like intense growth, or maybe a loss of population and an excitement for growth, perhaps. So I'll give you about 15 seconds to share your thoughts of how you identify with a Gardiner or a Deer Lodge, and don't let my comment about being in trouble affect if you're gonna associate more with the Deer Lodge or Gardiner. All right, give everybody about 5 more seconds to share their thoughts. All right, so it looks like most of our communities, interesting enough, Randy and Dennis, are seeing themselves more as a Gardiner than a deer lodge. About 2/3 are feeling that way, or 3/4 actually are feeling that way, which is probably not surprising in light of the explosive growth that we've seen around the West. So that gives you kind of an idea of how some of our folks are feeling about their current situation. And with that, a couple of questions that I wanted to ask you. One of them from our audience, as we look at this approach that you've developed, or you're patterning and sharing with these communities in Montana, are there ways that are there bits of this process, or how could someone take this process into their community? What are, you mentioned some of the phases. Are there ways that you would recommend anyone in any of these communities to be able to share this with their community and walk through this process to help establish this vision that you talked about?
Well, we have some other materials that we would be happy to share with them that are more about the process than about Future West. And we actually, the individual that made the video a couple of years ago, put together what do we call it? It was really a marketing piece for successful communities. But if folks would like to contact us, we could send that out to them and walk them through it, and they could share it with their fellow community members. And Randy, I don't know if you had any other ideas.
Yeah, and every region in every state, there's just a host of excellent organizations like your extension office, right? I know that the extension folks were involved in the Gardiner process. And Jake, you're better than anybody probably on this call, the resources that extension has to offer in Montana. In the country, we have these local resource community development agencies. So I think there's a host of nonprofits and government agencies or quasi-government agencies everywhere. And
we utilized the local government center up at Montana State University, and they actually helped us facilitate some of those community gatherings in Gardiner. They were great.
So I guess maybe to paraphrase some of that, looking maybe outside your community to somebody who can bring an outside perspective and facilitate, but that marriage of the local knowledge with maybe someone that can help bring all those groups together and have a conversation sounds important.
Yes.
All right. And sort of on that same vein, Todd in the audience asked, were you able to get Gardiner's two major opposing groups to work together in a common plan, or did they just dig their heels in, kind of like what we're seeing in the current political situation, where we're digging foxholes and tossing grenades instead of meeting in the middle and having a conversation? Yeah. So maybe were you able to do that, and maybe how you were able to get those two opposing groups to talk?
Yeah, well, Gardiner's unique. It's unique because it's the on the doorstep to Yellowstone Park, and it's got Yellowstone River and public lands and all that. When I was doing interviews, I'd ask people, so what do you love about Gardiner the most? And I thought that people would say, it's the river, it's the park, it's all. And almost to a person, they said it's the people. Gardiner really does have this sort of, this collection of committed, community-minded people. There's differences there, and there's some polarization in Gardiner, but I didn't witness a whole lot of that. We did get some of that at the workshops. But I just think there are so many positive people there concerned about the community that just kind of washed over everything. Not everybody and not every community is going to be like that. So it's an excellent question, and it's going to be a challenge for us in Deer Lodge. So, give me a call in about 9 months and I'll tell you how we did it or didn't.
Well, do you have any thoughts for maybe some of these community members that have opposing factions in their community that they're trying to walk a fine line or balance between. Have you found things that you feel like have worked in maybe some of the other communities you've worked with where you had more polarization?
Sure. I think by far the most important, is to start with, what we agree upon rather than our differences. Any community we work, there are very few people who are like, I hate this place. I wish I didn't live there. Everybody says, I live here for a reason. I love this place. And what is it? Well, it's our downtown, or it's the river, or whatever. Usually people we can find that agreement, and then getting the facts out to people, objective information. Now, that latter part, I'm concerned that that's going to be getting harder, because as a country, it seems like we can't even agree on what truth is. So I'm not sure this work is going to be getting any easier, but I would say, let's start with what we agree upon for sure, and do our best to get, accurate, relevant, salient information transparently out to people.
Yeah, that was a question I had for you, Randy, and there's a couple other good questions I want to get to, but in your process, I found it interesting that your phase 1, 2 are really building up to what we're typically used to, right? We usually run to phase 3, which is a workshop. We drag everybody into the auditorium and have a conversation, and usually I guess this is my experience, we kind of spin our wheels, and that's sort of, I'll address this question from Tony's, that sometimes we feel like we don't get anywhere. And in your process, you do a lot of work far before you bring everybody into the auditorium. Can you talk to maybe the reasoning behind that in your process and how you built your process?
Well, I think it's from a lot of years of experience. We have been talking with Danya Ramare some here about work up here, and hopefully to partner with you folks. And I think Danya calls it, to move slow, to move fast, right? And it's understanding the community, it's, being prepared. I'm sorry, it's go slow to go fast. It's better. Thank you, Danya. And so, I think that's key. And I, listening to Danya, I think they're the experts at it, and we're looking forward to working with her.
I would just add that, we spend a lot of time collecting data, but data only tells half the story, and spent even more time sitting down with people and one-on-one and really talking through the issues and what they consider to be their challenges and their values and the opportunities. And I think that was really a worthwhile investment of time.
Yeah, I think that was a really interesting for me to understand that process. There's so much of that building a group that helps build your process for you. I thought that was interesting. You reach into the community to get that group formed, and then you create some shared understanding. That data isn't you guys coming from the outside necessarily and sharing information that only you hold on to, but that shared understanding is built through your efforts, which I think is, and then that leads to that workshop. So it's not you in front of everybody talking, it's community members who have come to an understanding that's grown through your efforts. I think that's really interesting. Yeah, a couple of questions. One of them was about process fatigue. Tony asked about sometimes, we've done these things before in our communities. We've had these visioning things, and they maybe don't seem to go anywhere, or we're doing it again. And how, the question from Tony was, one, maybe how you deal with a situation like that where you have previous process fatigue, and two, her question was having these committees that you've worked with share their experience so that to overcome that. Do you think your communities would be willing or interested in maybe sharing their story from a committee standpoint?
Oh yeah, absolutely. And we brought in people from we bring in people from different communities to talk to other communities all the time. And, it's peer-to-peer learning, which oftentimes has more credibility than when we're trying to tell the story. And, you know, to go back to the process fatigue, it's a very real problem. A lot of times, you know, timing is everything. And, you know, there's sometimes where a group facilitated, you know, visioning process is just not appropriate. I would like to think there is no silver lining to the COVID cloud, but COVID has really accelerated a lot of these, you know, trends and issues, and especially those related to housing. And, you know, for better or worse, I do think that the timing is maybe better now than it was a year or two ago. Even with the challenges of social distancing, people are really freaked out, and they're recognizing that things are changing at a lightning fast speed. And I think that you might find that even in towns that have gone through somewhat similar processes, in light of COVID and the challenges that it's presenting, there might be more interest in it than you would think.
So Tony, to your point, and I can't make any promises, but we at the NAR initiative will try to reach out to Randy and Dennis and see if we can't connect maybe with their committees and share some of that information to the larger group. That's a great suggestion.
And maybe it's a little more targeted too. You know, maybe it's focused on one particular issue. I think the housing issue is, you know, red hot right now. And I know in the community that I live in, Livingston, housing is the #1 priority, and a lot of effort going into trying to better understand it, what the trends are, and what the opportunities or alternatives are for dealing with it.
Yeah, on that same thread about housing, there's a question about from the development side, it is a lot more straightforward perhaps to develop in outside of municipal boundaries because their process is far more streamlined, and we have municipalities that that process is maybe more arduous, and so a lot of development is happening in those areas that have a more streamlined process, which tend to happen outside the municipal boundaries. So Jeremy's asking, do you have any thoughts or ways that we can assist communities that are to focus development more within the municipal boundaries by changing their structure so that they can be on equal grounds with maybe easier to develop areas?
Yeah, it's a great question. I actually think that we're making a lot of progress here, and certainly in some of the communities I work in, and certainly in Bozeman. I just share some data on that. So in 1970, about 70% of Gallatin County, Bozeman, population was within its towns and cities. And over the next 4 decades, it was just, mostly all sprawl. Rural growth rates were twice as fast as urban growth rates. And that number went from 70% down to 55%. But since 2010, that thing it's really turned around, and about 2/3 of the growth in Gallatin County has been occurring in our towns and cities. I think that's due to market forces. At least in Gallatin County, people just can't afford 2 acres or 20 acres or something like that. I think that a lot of people, I think some of the shine has worn off on that. People get out there. A friend of mine always says people move to the West and they buy 3 houses. The first one, is that 20 acres out there, and they realize, geez, I forgot a gallon of milk. Now we got to drive back into town. The second one is on the edge of town, and the third one is in the town. So I think some of it is the market. Here you have to have the county as a partner. I mean, cities really, they're just not going to successfully attract a larger share of the growth of a community if they don't partner effectively with the county. And that's a 2-way street there. If the county doesn't have that vision of, we don't want to have, we're not in the housing business. We don't want to have sprawl out here. We're an agricultural community. If they're not there, it makes it really hard. But if the county's there, if they're willing to work with the city, if they're willing to sit down and develop interlocal agreements where if a development, is close to the town, and the county says, no, you got to go to the city, we're not going to provide the infrastructure, but the city can, you can be effective there. But so the county is a key player here.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. Thanks. That's those partnerships. I guess I had another question regarding that. You mentioned in the case of Gardiner, they're one of their partners is the National Park Service or Public Lands. How have you brought public land managers and build a relationship with them as part of this successful communities program?
Yeah, there were members of the steering committee that Randy spoke about that were National Park Service employees and also Forest Service employees. But it was sort of decided that the park wouldn't be a major host of this event. The community was pretty insistent that it be focused on the community itself. So the Park Service was definitely welcome to participate, and many of the people that came to the community forums and discussions were federal employees. But it was really the community itself that wanted to be in control of this initiative. And they obviously are, it's a symbiotic relationship between the park and the community. And I think, the neat thing about people in Gardiner is, they love the community and they love the park too. And I think they recognize that relationship is beneficial to both.
Yeah, thank you. That word symbiotic is pretty telling about the relationship, and having them at a seat on the table is great. A couple of other questions. One of them from Patty, who is curious. She said they're working on a similar process, and they're wondering, in order to kind of create that community profile, what were some of the common data sources that you guys look to when you're developing a community profile?
Yeah. One great source of information I can share with everybody here is Headwaters Economics, a Bozeman-based nonprofit.
And they participated in your last webinar. Yeah.
Oh, okay, cool. And they have something on their website is called a economic profile system. So you can get onto their website, go through the steps of putting in your geography. What do you want to look at? Do you want to look at, demographics? Do you want to look at, population change? Do you want to look at socioeconomics, or all of them? And hit a few buttons and it produces this cool report for you. That's an excellent source of information. Of course, American Community Survey, the Census Bureau's American Community Survey is indispensable. But I'll tell you, there's something else that's indispensable. It's just local knowledge, local experience and local knowledge. So, you can look at if you're trying to understand the housing market and trying to impart, information about the housing market to locals. The ACS has some information for sure on housing, and it's valuable. But if you really want to understand it, you could talk to the realtors in the community or the builders. And from that, you just glean so much information from local sources. So I think it needs to be a combination.
Yeah, do it.
I think this is related. When we did the surveys, we actually reached out to students in the high school and engaged with them. And the high school in Gardiner is really a fantastic institution and with a great reputation. And we really felt it was important to directly engage with students to find out what they're thinking about the community and its problems and opportunities. And we got some really good information from them.
Yeah, thanks. So that hard data, numbers data, and personal information through the knocking doors and making phone calls seems like a pretty powerful combination. With that, I'm curious, this question I think resonates with a lot of people. They serve on several different boards, and one of the challenges they get about the same 5 people showing up to these meetings. And Adriana's question is, how did you increase engagement? Maybe in part and parcel as how do you make sure that you're capturing some of the unheard voices in communities that maybe don't have political or social capital and power? How do you make sure that they're part of crafting a vision for the community?
Well, I'm gonna have Randy chime in, but we served dinner. That helped. The community events, and in all seriousness, we really tried to make it a homey event with good food and dessert and some social time for people to just catch up with their neighbors. Preceded our formal activities. So just a little hint. That's a good thing to do.
It's a great question. It's a common question. And I'm not going to sit here and pretend that it's easy to get beyond those 5 people who do everything. And that's where that process burnout comes from. So I think the most important thing besides feeding people is going out to them, right? So meeting them where they are, making it easy for them. So do interviews with them, meet them for lunch to do an interview, or in the evening, just make it as easy as possible just to get input from people. And then you hope that they'll be engaged in the process as it moves along. But again, I don't want to, pretend that this is easy. And I think it's getting harder. I've been doing this stuff a long time. And I think that people are just busier. They got to drop the kids off at soccer practice. Then they've got a night business meeting and the internet's a distraction. And COVID's not going to make it any easier, although in some ways it does make it easier. How many people you have here? So it's a challenge, but you have to go out to people and meet them where they are.
Yeah, a question about sort of some of the results, especially from Gardiner. The process there is it the result of that going to be formalized in an ordinance update or a formally adopted general plan? Like what is the status of that now, and where do you see it going in the future?
Yeah, well, where I hope it goes, again, they elected not to move forward with incorporation at this point, at least, and move it with this sort of quasi-local government system that we have here in Montana. So it would be actually, creating a community plan, just like a town would do. This one's really focused on land use, but that can bring in parks, right? Parks and trails, but it's not going to deal with infrastructure issues for the most part. But they'll create hopefully a land use plan, and then a zoning district that implements it. And then there is a local committee of residents who serve as sort of a quasi planning board or kind of a commission. It is the county commission's job ultimately to approve this and to adopt it, because it's still county jurisdiction. It's not gone into a municipality. But good people that are moving this forward now, and I sure look forward to watching their progress. And as we've told them, we're always available to help. I talked to one of the core group members just a couple weeks ago.
Great. A question, sort of going back to that comment and that question about the county and the city working together. Danya mentioned they often have different visions for themselves. The county might feel completely, we're going to be the place where growth happens, and the city wants something different. And it creates a pretty hard, challenging friction or tension between those communities or those two entities to look at how things occur at a regional scale. That's quite important as well. Have you encountered this, and what's your advice on getting people to collaborate across those jurisdictional boundaries?
This has been something that, has been one of the biggest challenges, biggest issues, that we deal with at Future West. That goes back to our days at the Sonoran Institute. I remember we were doing a workshop, and we wanted to, one of the sessions was going to be on this very issue, city-county collaboration. And so let's go out and find some great case studies and some speakers. And we were really challenged at that. I think that you have to stress again and again and again that you are in it together. And if the county decides we are going to let anything happen, we're happy with growth, that's where they are. And maybe then there needs to be a change in your county commission, if that's the case.
Well, I was just going to chime in that this speaks to the role of non-governmental organizations and in organizing their membership's involvement in these planning processes, and their members demanding better coordination and collaboration between cities and counties. Last night I sat in on a Zoom call. The town of Livingston, where I live, is crafting a new, what we call a growth policy, sort of a master plan for the community. And there were like 60 people viewing that, and some very strong opinions about what that plan has to say. That didn't happen by accident. That was NGOs organizing, elevating the understanding of the process and its importance to their membership, and helping their membership directly engage in that process.
Great, those are some great tips. And just a couple of things. I'm noticing I'm kind of keeping one eye on the chat. I appreciate the chatter back and forth between our audience members. We really encourage that. We want you to share ideas and links, insights. And I want to ask this question of our audience because I think it's important, and I think there's an opportunity for them to share some expertise. So my question for the audience is, what are some tools that you've seen work in your communities or other communities? And again, Randy and Dennis showcased one tool that they're working on in Montana, but we have this bigger regional Intermountain West idea. So are there other tools that you're using in your communities, or you've seen successfully used in other communities that you would be willing to share with the audience? And I'll give everybody just a minute to think through that. And while they're putting in their comments, I want to ask you a question, Randy and Dennis, while they're thinking, but are there tools you've seen regarding zoning that have been useful to encourage more mixed use buildings in rural towns to help prevent sprawl?
It's a great question. And I think this is an emerging issue. In our what Bozeman is example. So mixed use development, going vertical now for 10 years has definitely been the way things are happening. And that's happening in there's dozens, hundreds of Bozemans throughout the Intermountain West. But those communities of 2,000, 5,000, 10,000 doing that is, I think it's the next frontier, but it's going to be different. Going vertical in Gardiner is different than going vertical in Bozeman. So we need to approach it with some different, design guidelines and examples. But it's something I'm really excited about, actually.
Great, thank you. Jeremy shared this idea as well in the Q&A, but that idea of showing the fiscal analysis, the impacts of cost of service, that idea that turning a field into houses isn't, or needs to be understood that it may not be all fiscally a beneficial thing for a community. That was one recommendation. As well, keep in the chat, feel free to share with us any tools or processes that you've used in your community that you feel that have been successful. So Randy, you had something else? Yeah,
I did. I saw my friend and Gallatin County Planning Director Sean O'Callahan, something in the chat there. I can't believe I didn't mention it, and that is between the cities of Bozeman here in Gallatin County and the city of Belgrade up the road in Gallatin County, they have produced a plan for the area in between these. It's kind of a triangular shaped geography. And they have produced what they call the triangle plan for cooperation between them. And it's an exciting thing. And you can, Sean put the link up there to the triangle plan. And I would suggest for people who are thinking about that regional cooperation that they take a look at that.
Yeah, I think one of the benefits one thing we're trying to do with the NAR initiative is really highlight that there are things happening. As much as it may feel like you're the only town facing these challenges, there are towns that have faced it in the past, that continue to face it now, and will face it in the future, that we can learn from and share information, share experience. So we appreciate Randy and Dennis for sharing what's happening in Montana, some of the great work that's happening there. And we encourage people to reach out to Randy and Dennis if you have more questions. You can reach out to us on the NAR core team if you have more questions. But I do want to close with one last question. We have about 3 minutes left. Well, I'm gonna ask a question of the audience, if you don't mind me, Randy and Dennis, again. As we look to the future, in our next session, we'll be talking about this community peer-to-peer learning network. But we as the NAR initiative are looking 6 months down the road, or 4 months down the road, 3 months down the road, and trying to figure out what would be most helpful to our audience communities. So if you could take just a minute and think about what would be some issues or ideas for session topics for our next webinar series, which would be in the spring of 2021, and be willing to share those in the chat with us. That'll help our steering committee and our NAR core team work on developing our next series of webinars that we want to be to resonate with you as community members. So as you're typing those in, I'm just going to let you know and share my screen that our next session will be in December, and that will be a peer-to-peer community exchange of information. And we encourage anybody that may be interested to join us, to talk community to community about some of the challenges, lessons you've learned through this webinar series, resources you may know about, so that we can all raise the tide together, I guess, of gateway communities. So with that, I wanted to thank, especially on behalf of these communities that participated today, us at the NAR initiative, Randy, Dennis, for your time, for your expertise, for your insights, for giving us some additional hope as we work with communities that are looking to create a vision.